How's it going, YouTube? This is Skul. Welcome to my video game pickups for the month of August 2019. Don't have much to talk about, so let's just go ahead and I'll just start with this right here in front of me. I picked up a PC game. I usually don't do this. I just prefer getting console games, but this is very important to me. This is a game called Inline... I'm getting the reflection in the camera there. This is a game called Inline Skating, and it's part of Taco Bell's X Games experience. This was released in Taco Bell Kids Meals back in the year 2002, and I remember loving these a lot back then. Not this one in particular. I tried it, and it's terrible. Hit detection's awful. There's something there, but they didn't quite develop it properly. As I recall, the other two games in the series were more fun, and if you put all three of them on a computer, it unlocks a free game, a free fourth game. Anyway, so I just, you ever have one of those moments where something just rushes back to you and you remember something existed even though you haven't seen it in 15 years? Well, that's this. 15-year-old PC game, one of three, and it's the worst of the three. I went ahead and just bought it off eBay for $5. I can easily get the other two as well if I want. So, that out of the way, I hit up my retro game store for the first time in months. And, I mostly went there to trade some Funko Pops. If you guys are longtime viewers of the channel, you'll know that for a while I was sponsored by 1UP, which was a real-life loot box, where they would send you stuff. It was kind of like Loot Crate, but it was specifically for things in pop culture. There was always a shirt, there was all sorts of stuff, and sometimes there were Funko Pops. And I just collected so many that I don't want. Most of my Funko Pops, I don't know if you can see them in the frame, they're all over here. I've got Bulbasaur Charmander from Pokemon, I've got a Porg from Star Wars, I got all the retail Zootopia Pops and all the retail Frozen Pops, and that's all I really want. So anything extra I had, I traded into my retro game store, which now takes Funko Pops, and took a big chunk off of what I ended up getting there. I ended up picking up my first Sega Genesis game in a long time. Barney's Hide and Seek. Yeah! Solid game for my Genesis collection. Not really. But it was one of the only games that they had with a case that I knew I didn't have. They had a lot of other games with cases, but those were all sports games, and I already have a few sports games, and I never remember what ones I've got. So, Barney was a safe choice. That's number 11 in my Genesis collection. I ended up picking up a Dreamcast game, 102 Dalmatians, Puppies to the Rescue. I had the Dreamcast web browser before, but this is the first Dreamcast game that I own. I loved 102 Dalmatians, actually, the movie. I don't know what it is. I loved that. 101 Dalmatians, the live-action one, really, really great. Glenn Close is perfect as Cruella de Vil, Fight Me. And they made a sequel called 102 Dalmatians, and they made this game sort of based off that film. I don't have a Dreamcast yet. I'd love to get one next month. Probably isn't going to happen. If you don't know, September 9, 1999 was the date a Dreamcast released in North America, which makes it 20 this year, this September 9. Be great to get a Dreamcast on that day. Probably not going to happen. And I ended up getting two PS1 games from that store that I was missing as well. Big Bass Fishing and NASCAR Heat. I love PlayStation 1, trying to get more games for it. And they came out to practically nothing thanks to the Funko Pops I traded in. And like I've said before, I got brand new jewel cases for all my disc-based games, even my Dreamcast games. Just brand new jewel cases. It looks like you could have picked it off the shelf yesterday. And I've been putting them all in there. And yeah, so that's what I got from my retro game store. I also ended up picking up another PlayStation 1 game this month. I got Tekken 3. I ended up watching some YouTuber, I think it might have been GameStack, reviewing all sorts of different PS1 games about like what's the best on the system, and they mentioned Tekken 3 being one of the best 3D fighters. I don't know much about 3D fighters. I don't have many of them. I never played them growing up. So I picked up Tekken 3 for the PS1. The pamphlet's in terrible condition. It was all I could do to even fit it in there in the brand new jewel case. You can probably see how bad it is if I move it around like that. But it's it's a black labeled PlayStation 1 game, and it looks great in the jewel case at least, so there's that. And let's go ahead and talk about my Switch games. Did not get many. I picked up 2 total from the store. One of them barely even counts. Anyway, I got Yu-Gi-Oh! Legacy of the Duelist, Link Evolution. Long-winded. Believe it or not, I'm 99% sure this is the very first Yu-Gi-Oh! Video game I've ever owned. I followed Yu-Gi-Oh! A little bit back when it was, big, but I made the mistake of watching the anime and basing my opinions on the series off of that. It's terrible. Don't do that. So, there were Yu-Gi-Oh! Video games all the way back in, I'd like to say the PS1 had some, but this is the very first one I've ever gotten. Solely because I pre-ordered it with GCU back when I had it, and then there was also a $10 Best Buy gift certificate that they give you if you pre-ordered it. So after all was said and done, this cost me like $10 brand new. So I figure, I've heard a lot of good things about Yu-Gi-Oh! Legacy of the Duelist, so maybe I'll give it a try. The other retail game I picked up was, I'm going to butcher this, Lumines Remastered. It's easier for me to say Lumines, although that's probably not right. This was a limited run game, but if you are a Switch collector, you probably noticed the cover is different. Well, Best Buy's been doing this with a few of LRG's releases. They have been buying up a number of copies for themselves and sticking on an alternate approved cover and selling it in their stores. A lot of people ended up getting Ukulele that way. There's been a few others. So for a while there, when I was pre-ordering LRG games, I actually decided if there's a confirmed, announced Best Buy release for these games, I'm skipping it and picking it up later. That's what I did with Lumines. And there's a few others that I'm doing that with as well, like Turok. I want those games so bad, but it just makes way more sense to wait for the Best Buy release. Now, Best Buy's been very clear. There's no guarantee they actually will sell the game, just they have the right to, and they most likely will, but there's no guarantee. So, I'm going to hold out for whatever I can, and if I happen to miss out because they decide not to sell the games, oh well, my loss. This stack here is all I have left to show off today, and these are all fulfilled pre-orders for limited print games. Wow. Okay, biggest one for me, personally, is Dragon's Lair Trilogy. Limited Run Games published this as well. This is a Don Bluth classic. If you've never heard of this, have you ever heard of the animated films All Dogs Go to Heaven and The Secret of NIMH? Okay, the animator behind those films made this game for the arcades in the 80s. It used Laserdisc technology to let you play cutscenes that were fully animated, like movie-level animation, and it's a classic arcade game, and it got a port on the Switch, and Limited Run Games made the physical print of that. So I was super excited to get this, can't wait to try it out. A classic game, a classic arcade game, classic animation game. Just, if you're a fan of any of those, if you're a fan of Don Bluth, then this is definitely one for you to try out. It's on the eShop, you don't have to pay for a physical release. There it is. Up next are the latest 2 games from Super Rare over in England that I picked up. These are numbers 19 and 20 in their collection. Super excited to have their first 20 games. Frankly, that's probably where I'm going to have to stop. It's definitely where I'm going to have to stop. My wife is in the room right now, and she knows. So these are probably the last Super Rare games I'll ever buy from their store, but, priorities. Anyway, I got Tokitori Collection and Rive Ultimate Edition. And fun fact, both of these cartridges actually have 2 games on them. I plopped them in my Switch to check for updates. 1, no updates needed. 2, both games, when you plop them into the Switch, 2 games pop up on the home screen. Pretty cool. There's a few games that do that, and I love when a collection actually has both games individually choosable on the home screen. That's pretty awesome. I ended up getting 2 games in from PlayAsia from East Asia Soft. I am going to butcher this. Oniken and Odalus Collection. This is another one of those where you put it into the Switch and it's 2 different games. This is their 5th Switch release, and ironically, this came in the mail before that. Death Road to Canada, their 7th Switch release. So, glad that those games from East Asia Soft came in. We also have the 2nd game from Red Art Games, Stay. I don't know anything about it. But Red Art Games is based out of France. The entire cover is in French. Can't read it. That's just because of French laws. But the cartridge itself is in English. The game is in English. Nothing's wrong with it. It's just the cover's in French. And finally, the first release from 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, the 6th confirmed company to put out limited print Switch games, The Messenger from Special Reserves. This has been a long time coming. They hyped it up for months. This sold back in, I'd like to say, March or April this year. Finally in my hand. Glad I have it. That's 6 different companies that are making limited print Switch games right now. And there's so many more that have announced their intentions as well. There's one that announced it, took people's money, and then disappeared. Wonder how often that's going to happen. That's a conversation for another day, and that is my video game pickups for the month of August 2019. I'll be back next month with, if it's this many games again, I'll be surprised. Personally, my favorite game that I picked up, Barney for the Genesis.